walked through the front door, and here was a group of guys who were sat around. They were involved in the business of what I didn't know at the time was going to be the thing that was going to be for the rest of my life. I knew if I didn't do it then, that he wouldn't see me having made that move, and also that life was incredibly short. And here I was faced with something that was so obvious, that life was, finite. I knew there was never going to be a perfect moment. When this check turned up, and that was for the money. I'd spent quite a bit of the money on getting the team together to kind of do the piece of work, and so my business partner took it to the bank, and they were like, yeah, this is an American check, it's going to take 60 days to clear. And I can still remember that, absolutely, like, oh my god, we have not got 60 days here. It was very early on. We set our 3 values at Koto, which are uncompromising positivity. I think if you're in the service of others, doesn't matter which bit of the service industry you're in, I think this applies to the whole thing. You have to come in every day with a positive mind state. It's just cadence, which is about trying to find the cadence with those that you're working around, whether that's an external person like a client or whether that's internally. It is a team game, and we all have to be on the pitch and play together. It's relentless hustle, and I think hustle culture gets some negativity at times, but for me, I think it is relentless. Humans are about being together, and ultimately our work is about connecting people to ideas, making them believe in those ideas, and then using those ideas to drive change. The high points for me are where we've managed to wrangle the chaos into meaningful moments. And so there's some classic stuff, like the moment we won Coca-Cola as a client. The lesson I got out of that one was, like, work can come from anywhere. Like, you should always be just like, don't think about your network as something that you're growing with an outcome. It might just keep on making connections, because they will drive things. But I think for me, I always have to live with one foot in presence and one foot in tomorrow, because the foot in tomorrow drives me not to be overly comfortable in the present. I think it's about trying to find, have calm, but also be active. Try and make sure that you're going after it and attacking it, but that isn't your mode 24/7. Be reflective, be curious, stand back.
I believe everyone has a story to tell. Through seeking true, authentic insights about the entrepreneurial journey, I provide a platform for our peers to share their stories and inspire those that listen. This is the County Business Talks podcast, produced by H2 Productions.
Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? You okay?
Yeah, not bad.
Feeling all right?
Yeah, not too bad. Nice and early, but get up and attack the day, right?
Mate, Tom, man, mate, I'm really grateful for you jumping on. The voice is still going. I've got 6 hours to go, and it's still there, mate. It's still there. Just about. We're quoting through, mate. Really great we're jumping on this, and we're gonna jump straight in. So, welcome, obviously, James Greenfield, CEO and founder of Koto. Mate, tell listeners a little bit about your story and your career.
Wow, what a place to start. So, so I'm CEO of a branding company which has got 4 studios, one in London, one in Los Angeles, one in Berlin, and our latest one in New York. It's a team of about 100 people, and we work with quite a lot of the world's biggest brands, and then also some brands that want to be the world's biggest brands, to help them come to life and kind of tell their story to the world, I guess. And how I got there has been, I wouldn't say it's been a straight line. I've, there's been kind of many things along the way. And when you sent me these questions before this, I thought, where do you start with something like that? And I kind of asked my wife, and she was like, come on, I've heard you tell that story 100 times. So maybe I do know it better than I don't. But I think it all rolls back to one moment in time for me, which was I was a teenager at school, and like a lot of teenagers, wondering a bit kind of like what the future held. I had to go and do some work experience, and rather than just doing any old thing, I was quite keen to try and find something I was interested in life. And I remember at the time my mum knew someone that worked in a local design agency, and I got sent there. And I think it's fair to say that that's where my career started. Walked through the front door, and here was a group of guys who were sat around. They were involved in the business of what I didn't know at the time was going to be the thing that was going to be for the rest of my life, which was I don't think when you're at school anyone knows that that's a thing that you can work in. Everyone's always channeled towards a certain subject or whatever. And so, that I spent a summer there. That opened me up, and then since then I've been lucky enough to go on, work with a lot of amazing people who've taken me on my journey to where I am today.
Yeah, amazing. Because I remember when we first sort of met, you said you were sort of one of them lucky ones that from that early age, from quite a young age, that you found something that you loved, and you followed that dream, and that's where it's sort of taking you. And I think I know, like talking about, obviously you had a long career, like working in various different agencies in sort of London and stuff. But what was the sort of inspiration then to start your own business in 2014?
It's a funny thing because I think, since a teenager, I'd always held an ambition to work for myself, and I don't think I'd ever really been able to pin down where that came from. It wasn't like I had someone in my network or my family who was a business owner. Neither of my parents had jobs where they worked for themselves. There wasn't someone that I looked at and said, I'd like to be like that. But I always felt, for whatever reason, it was something that I wanted to do. And, sometimes I look back on that and I think, was that about self-determination? Sometimes I look back on that and think, was that about, like, the want for wealth? I don't know. There's all these things that you can kind of attribute it to. But I think I just felt like it was something that was driving inside me. But at the same time, I was also always super aware that I didn't want to go too early, and there was more to learn. And I've always been really curious about stuff, and so I've always consumed a lot of things. And so I was in this position where, for a few years, I was like, should I, shan't I? Should I, shan't I? And there was always reasons not to. Like, there's economic challenges back in the kind of late 2000s, or there was new media emerging, or there was new platforms that I didn't really understand, and so I was always trying to like fill my knowledge gaps and try and get better at stuff. Unfortunately, the thing that really drove me in the end was that my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and for me, it's such an obvious thing, but I knew if I didn't do it then, that he wouldn't see me having made that move, and also that life was incredibly short. And here I was faced with something that was so obvious, that life was, finite, and there was never going to be a perfect moment. You weren't going to know everything. You weren't going to have mastered all that stuff. And at that moment in time, I was sat in a good senior job. I had a good salary. Like I was traveling. I was working in really amazing clients. I was doing a lot of work in California at that time, and I had to kind of realize that I was going to give all of that up, completely get rid of my salary overnight and all of the comforts of life, and put myself into a challenging position. But here was like the most driving force, which made complete sense for me to do that. And I do sometimes think, if that hadn't happened, would I have ever done it? Would I have ever like made that leap, or would have I always found the excuse? But here was something that kind of forced me into that situation. So as much as that was obviously a kind of terribly sad and kind of traumatic period in my life, it was also the most life-changing period in my life, because I essentially decided to kind of finally, at that point, I think I'd been working for like 15 years in an area, and I knew I could do it. I'd been doing it for other people and working for them, but that was the thing that really spurred me and pushed me on to do that.
It's amazing to listening to you. Thanks for sharing that, mate. I guess and I guess for me, taking something like that, a traumatic, the negative thing that's happened to you, but actually taking that moment and going, I'm gonna use all that negative or traumatic experience to go on and strive to do. That's your motivation to go on and strive and succeed, and certainly what a success you've made of it. And I always knew we'd obviously spoke many times previously to you. Like you said, I think the first time I met you, thinking to myself, you're always going to run your own business. It was always going to be a matter of time. And we spoke about it. Like you said, you was working on some amazing projects prior to obviously starting your business thing, with some huge stuff going, like you said, always over in California and doing some amazing stuff with some big agencies. So you sort of think, I've got a huge salary in that comfort zone, I suppose, that you're sort of in. But like you say, taking that traumatic thing, and then actually, I knew when you took that jump that it was only going to, wouldn't take you too long, and you certainly proved me right, mate. I knew I was right. I know these things, but mate, it was, and it's been amazing to see like the growth and achievement you've got over the last, 7 years now, isn't it? You've been running Koto, is that?
Yeah, going
Is
on
that
8
right?
this Christmas. Yeah.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. Talk to me then. Obviously, starting this, you've gone in. Well, I'm going to go out on my own, and obviously having the confidence to go and grow that. But and it's grown phenomenally. But talk to me about some of the challenges over the last 7 years of running that. And well, I guess where does the global pandemic? I have to ask everyone that because it's over like whatever industry you're in. It affects every business, isn't it? So I'm sure you didn't have that in the business plan, a risk assessment for a global pandemic.
No, I think, the challenges totally changed, month by month as you run a business. Like at first it's about survival. At first it's like, we have a finite amount of money. We need to go out there and make things happen. We need to get customers. We need to make connections. We need to make some really big decisions about who we're going to employ and why they're right. You need to work out the cost that you're willing to put out in the world, the things that you're willing to kind of, I guess, risk on. I was really glad that I did it with business partners. I think I probably underestimated that before I went into this process. And I think, one of the things I really feel for people is I do a bit of mentoring at the moment. And one of the guys I'm working with he's trying to find a business partner at the moment. And he's realized a little way into his journey that, having a business partner would make his business exponentially easier for him. And so I think there's certain things that I completely underestimated from a challenge point of view. And in some cases I just got lucky because I decided, maybe in a way that I look back on now and think you maybe didn't give that as much attention as you probably should have to do that. So I think the first challenge I had was, the idea of being on my own, but I wasn't, because luckily I decided to have two business partners. And I think that's been a real saving grace. Beyond that, I think, we had some difficult challenges up front. There were some ethical decisions. There were some companies that came to want to work with us when we had very little who wasn't necessarily comfortable working with, and saying no to that money was really tough. And when I look back on that, I'm glad I did. But at the same time, I'm also like, wow, that was a bit of a moment. And then beyond that, I think, like any new business,
say no to those bits because you'd set up a business with core values that you thought, this is the company, and I don't.
I think I always like to, you look at the decisions that other people make, whether they're in your network or whether they're just like in people you're aware of or whatever, and you think if you go down that path, you're probably setting your reputation forever. So one of the businesses that came to us very early on was a fur business. Got no idea how they found us. I got it seemed quite bizarre to me. We didn't have any work at that moment in time. Me and one of my co-founders, Joey, I can remember we were sat in our very first studio. It didn't have any heating. It was freezing in there. The internet was terrible. And here's some money on the table. And it's just not something I'm comfortable with as an industry. I can't say I know tons about it, but I just decided that I knew it didn't feel right to me. And so at that moment in time, I had to say no to it. And I look back at it and I'm like, I'm glad we did, because I think if we'd done that piece of work, even if we'd never told anyone around about it, we'd known we did it. Whereas, to this day, there's nothing that we've done that I don't feel anything but like happy and proud about, in terms of the fact that it's been the right decision for us. So challenges like that are really tough. I think, you have other moments where one of the biggest challenges we had was right near the beginning. We managed to land this big hospitality client, which was a really amazing kind of like revenue and creative source for us, and we were doing some interesting work with them. And it came down to the first day that they were going to pay us, and I didn't really know much about America or the way that they pay people, and this check turned up, and that was for the money. I'd spent quite a bit of the money on getting a team together to kind of do the piece of work, and so my business partner took it to the bank, and they were like, yeah, this is an American check, it's going to take 60 days to clear. And I can still remember that, absolutely, like, oh my God, we have not got 60 days here. And you don't set up a creative business with a knowledge of the American banking system. It's just, that's not the kind of thing you deal with. And so there's been those moments like that have been real, like, how are we going to do this? And I was really lucky in that situation. A really good friend lent me quite a considerable amount of money and completely bailed the whole business out at that moment in time. And paid him back a little bit later, and I'll be forever in his debt for that. But those are the challenges. I think beyond that, though, the biggest challenge is that you set yourself the goal of wanting to be, I guess, an elite performance. I think there's a way of talking about it is, you know, in every industry, in every walk of life, there is this kind of elite level, and that's where I always wanted Koto to operate. You know, so it's a bit like the best sports team, or you know, it's a bit like elite special forces or whatever. And to do that, you have to find people of a certain mindset. You have to find people that are willing to constantly reinvent the business of creativity to really be able to kind of drive things forward. Otherwise, what happens is there's someone younger, there's someone hungrier, there's someone who's more nimble than you that's just going to, you know, that's going to run you around. And, you know, and I find it very easy in the world of business to slip into sports analogies. But you have to be fit. You just got to stay fit all the time. And the only way to do that, especially in a growing business, is to add the right people into that. Now, that's not me micromanaging and pick every person, because that'd be a liar if I said I'd do that. Because, you know, I don't even interview every person anymore because we're too big for that. But it's about mindset. It's about trying to find people that fit into this idea of how we perform at our best every day. Because, you know, that's the industry that we're in, is we have got to take people on uncomfortable journeys. And so I think my one biggest challenge is finding creative people who will understand what Koto stands for and how that is going to require something from them for us to continue to be successful.
I love that. And then I guess that leads on to that, because again, I talk on a podcast a lot about culture and how you create a culture within a company. And for me, I often talk about, you know me, obviously when I had to close the salon, it didn't work out. I always talk about, I was never a hairdresser, so I found it very difficult as a boss, a leader, whatever it was, to create a culture within the hairdressing industry that I didn't feel like I inspired people. And so I find the subject around culture within a company. Again, we use sport analogies very similarly. Both Spurs fans, of course, mate, we've got to get that in, haven't we? How could I not put that in on the podcast? But for me, like, culture within a football club, within a changing room, whatever that looks. But did you, right from that start? Because what it strikes me from talking to you, you had such a clear vision for Koto, what you wanted from the people, even from the companies that you work with, but the culture that you obviously wanted to create in that. And was that really clear right from the start? And how has that changed? Has the culture changed over the course of, you know, across 4 different offices, nearly 100 staff? How has that looked?
So yeah, culture has always been massively important to me. I think there's there's a number of different component parts to it. One is I was lucky enough to work at some other amazing companies, and some people got culture amazingly right, and other people got culture, in my eyes, you know, it might have been right for them, but in my eyes, got it wrong. And I think one of the things that I did when I was going on that journey, as I kind of worked my way up, is that I would always mentally note the things that I thought were successful and the things that weren't successful in terms of like generating successful culture. Companies I aspired to be like, whether I had first-hand or second-hand, I guess, experience of that. I think one of the things that also is a kind of typical thing of the creative industries is that they can be workhouses. The creativity excuses the idea that you can work people to the bone, you know. And I think I used to work for somebody years ago who got culture massively wrong, and he always used to have this thing. He used to be like, the hardest work we'll do in the week is Friday night because everyone else is in the pub, and that's your competitive edge. And I always used to think that was like the most foolish thing of way of talking about it, because what you're essentially doing is robbing the fuel from people that allows them to get up on Monday and go to it, which is, you know, whether they choose to spend Friday night with their family or their friends or with their colleagues or whatever, you know, it depends probably where they're at in their life stage. But that's the fuel that makes us mean that, you know, when we get up on a Monday morning and attack the week, we've had that important time that's kind of going to bond us together. And so I kind of took all that stuff, and then I think beyond that as well, I always just had like this personal sense of like, if I'm going to spend time with people, I want to spend time with people. I don't want to just be around people. I want to like understand them. I want to get to know them. I want to know their motivations. I want to be, you know, and I think it's easy as a boss to be like, oh, I'm friends with all my staff. It's not about like trying to, you know, tipping in yourself into Ricky Gervais territory. But what it's about is about understanding people. And I think that's why culture comes really important for me, because it's like, you know, you've got to keep on working that. And I think one of the challenges of a scaling business, particularly where, you know, some of the people that work for me sit 5,900 miles away from me, is how you start to kind of like reinvent that. And so one of the things that, you know, and pandemics put a bit of a boot in this recently, but one of the things we try to do is a global gathering every year where everyone gets together and you spend time with people. So this year we all went to Miami. It was an amazing experience. You know, Miami's a pretty incredible place to go as well, but it's in that situation to try and take those moments with other people, but then also let them take moments with each other, because what your reality of kind of create a company where it has such geographic kind of footprint is someone who's maybe grown up in the east of Europe and now lives in Berlin has got a very different lived life experience from someone that grew up on the west coast of America and now lives in LA. You know, there's weather and obvious like differences in terms of those cities and the way those feels, but there's also a ton of differences in terms of, you know, history, the way they see the world, etc., etc. You know, and as we continue to grow around the world, I'm sure that will be even more pronounced. And so for me, I think culture is about creating connections. Now, that's not to say we always get it right. And, you know, I'm always looking to do things differently. And for me, I think one of the things I spend a reasonable amount of time traveling to the studios, and I'll continue to do that more, is trying to think about how you kind of reinvent that culture, how you create new moments. I think one key thing for us is, though, we've always, every time we've opened a studio, tried to send somebody, at least even more than one person from one of the other studios, so that you're already starting off with this kind of germ of a culture, and then you let that culture change, and it creates its own kind of its own moments, its own monuments, its own jokes, its own kind of things, you know, all these things that we use to socially bond ourselves together. And so for me, I think that is so vital. And one of the things we did on that front was very early on, we set our 3 values at Koto, which are uncompromising positivity. I think if you're in the service of others, doesn't matter which bit of the service industry you're in, I think this applies to the whole thing. You have to come in every day with a positive mind state, because you know there'll be challenges, people won't be happy, there'll be things that need to happen. And if you're not uncompromising in that positivity, then that'll get you down, and people will see your face slip, and, you know, you'll piss off the people you're serving. I think the second one we've got is just cadence, which is about trying to find the cadence with those that you're working around, whether that's an external person like a client or whether that's internally. And in that situation there, the just is all about doing the right thing in that moment as well, and understanding that it is a team game and we all have to be on the pitch and play together. And then the third one there is relentless hustle, you know, and I think hustle culture gets some negativity at times, but for me, I think it is relentless. You know, there are days off. We have Saturday and Sunday. We never work Saturday and Sunday. We try to stay up on top of our hours, but to stay ahead, to keep doing that, you got to get up every day and kind of like think about what's going to be different. How am I going to change this? What am I going to do with this? And the only way to do that is to be relentless in that hustle and be really sure. And the thing about those values is that, you know, we decided we needed them. And I think it was about 6 months into running the business, we just went off-site to a really nice spot next to the river near where we worked in the centre of London, and we just said, right, what do we all think our values are? And everybody threw it onto the table. We worked through it pretty quickly, wrote it down, all went and got a drink, and that was that. And it was so honest and authentic in that moment. And I think a lot of companies, when they're trying to come up with this stuff, try and make it a bit too clever. They try and bake it a bit too much. I think most entrepreneurs or most company leaders will have an inherent feeling for what that is. You've just got to try and get it out of you. Now, we're lucky we're creative and we can kind of invent that in a way that, you know, has kind of, I guess, meaningful difference.
Your skill set, isn't it? I guess that's your skill set, isn't it? I guess that's your skill set, extracting that information and getting to the core and creating that. So when like you said, coming up with those 3 values, and that's something, I guess, then when you, because what I was going to ask was, in each studio, do you feel like this? There's separate, because of the geography of it, there is separate sort of individual cultures there, or because you've got those 3 core values, that those 2 people from that studio that go and start that company, that studio in another location, they're gonna, like you said, they're gonna make sure that those 3 core values are imparted to everyone in there, and that's that culture will be the same across the board then.
I think it's work in progress, in terms of, like, you know, we've scaled quite quickly in recent times, but I think the aim I'd love to get to is it's kind of 50-50. Do you know what I mean? It's like 50% the same the world over in terms of mind state, in terms of approach, so that if I got 2 customers and kind of sat them down and said, what's your experience of Koto like? There'd be a lot of similarity. That's the aim that I would want to get to from a values-based point of view. I think the other 50%, you know, the way that stuff's delivered, you know, there's no doubt that, you know, if I look at the West Coast of America, they have this kind of inherent sunniness, which I think waking up in amazing weather every day is going to just imbue in you. You know what I mean? It's a bit harder when you're kind of waking up in February in England. But obviously we would try to aspire to that. But then I also think as well, there's like something about the way that we kind of think about, you know, the cultural identification of a country as well, and what the people from that country are like. So it's about leaving space for both those things. And I'm really interested in how you do that. I think the other challenge is obviously scale. And I think, you know, there's a thing that I've been not struggling, but kind of looking at a lot recently, is that the Roman army always fought in units of 100 people because they felt beyond 100 people, stuff started to break down. Now we're at that kind of special moment at the moment. And so you have to be really careful to like understand your history and the dynamics of teams and people and how they kind of work together and be aware enough to know that if you get past a certain point, things are going to change. And so that's something I'm really thinking about at the moment, and kind of like how we deal with the challenges of the kind of, because it's all about social bonds and those people kind of feeling like they have a connection with each other. And so we're kind of constantly always reinventing that.
And how, since like because I'm assuming from a creative industry, what's your take on the whole hybrid working? How have you guys fixed for that? Because I guess I remember speaking to you previously about, you know, from a creativity point of view, having people in the studio, everyone there together and bouncing those ideas off is a lot easier than it is on Teams or on Zoom or whatever that looks like. Have you got a hybrid working environment, or do you have people in the studio? What's it like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, isn't it? I think this is a thing where you have to kind of be aware of your own personal preference, but it's also important that you don't ignore your own personal lived experience, because that's, you know, ultimately as a leader of a company what you're looking to kind of draw on. And so quite early on in the kind of pandemic, where obviously like everyone else we all got sent home to our homes, I think I kind of observed a few things. I think the first thing I observed was, for the global leadership, whether that was someone as a creative leader or kind of an account leader or whatever it was, that Zoom life was exhausting. It was kind of draining. It was, you know, there's something about being on a camera all day that just leaves you absolutely on the floor afterwards. And so in a way, I think, you know, that meant I knew that was unsustainable for us as a company. I think the second thing is, we just talked about culture. I think culture is really hard on a video life, and it doesn't matter how many people write kind of articles about, you know, technology is going to release us from X, Y, or Z. I can see it with my own eyes. I can experience it, and I can feel it. And in that as well, you've also got to acknowledge the fact that, you know, that there's people that work at Koto that are 50 and have got kids and live in a nice house, and, you know, and their whole life is kind of like set up as they want, versus there's some people who are recent graduates who are kind of like making their first steps in the world, aren't necessarily set up for home working, haven't necessarily got everything they need, and you can see that they're living very different kind of lives and experiences. Now, even if some people maybe prefer the quiet of like thinking time at home and all that stuff, which, you know, I'm always super aware of, I think we are social people. Humans are about being together, and ultimately our work is about connecting people to ideas, making them believe in those ideas, and then using those ideas to drive change. And so from my point of view early on, I was like, we can't live this life in the long term. It doesn't matter for me the benefits that it has for people. You know, when we're not American, we don't have 3-hour commutes. We're not living this kind of like, you know, this kind of terrible traffic life that they live. And I think as a country, Britain looks to America quite a lot. Now, I've got quite a lot of American team, but we were already set up in a way that, you know, most of them didn't have terrible commutes and stuff, and they were living you know, a little bit closer to where we worked, etc. So early on, we decided to do a 4-1, which is Monday to Thursday in the studio, and then Friday work from home. I'm aware enough to know that I'm not sure everybody loves it, and some people would love a bit more flexibility. But for me, it's about thinking about those factors such as culture, thinking about the fact that we need to make ideas that connect with people, and the only way to do that is spend time with people. And then it's also about us understanding that, I think in a way, and this is kind of maybe a bit controversial, but there is a bit of sacrifice about the fact that, you know, if I have to get up and get out the comfort of my home to go and kind of face the challenge of what we're doing with other people, then maybe that's a price that we have to pay, and maybe that is a bit tougher. But, you know, I think it's something we're still working on. We've gone back to that, and it's worked well in the main. But, you know, like any business, nothing's never fixed or static. You just got to keep on going. The thing that's interesting for us around COVID was that when it first happened, the whole world just held its breath, particularly on spending on brand and marketing. And so you're like just trying to work out where this thing's going to go. And then suddenly everyone decided it was a great time to get their house in order, and we've never been busier, which meant put this amazing strain and challenge on, because suddenly you were like trying to manage, a massive business, essentially, with quite a big turnover from your spare room upstairs, whilst the rest of your family life's happening on downstairs. And I think for me personally, the thing that I think, and this is a very personal lens on this, is I'm a great believer in transition. If you're going from one thing to another, you have to have a transition space from it. So, if I get up in the morning and go for a run, that for me is a transition about me quite often leaving the day before behind and setting myself for the day ahead. And I think for me, the commute going to work has always been a moment for me to go like, right, I've done family, I'm now going to go and do work, and try and be a bit more singular in those modes. And I think the trouble with kind of remote work life, if you're a parent of young children like I am, is I just feel like you end up doing two things badly, because you're always thinking about one or the other, rather than allowing yourself to kind of transition and focus on what hopefully you would be focused. Now, obviously, that's an aspirational thing, and I'd be a liar if I didn't say I wasn't sat at home stewing on something that had happened in the day, or thinking about something, or working through it. But you've got to at least attempt that focus to make sure that you're kind of in the place where you should be at that moment in time.
I completely agree. I get that completely. Ultimately, I've mentioned this on so many episodes throughout the day, really, about being present wherever you are, whatever you're doing at that moment in time. And it's something I'd love to talk to you about, like the whole work-life balance thing, and what that sort of looks like, especially running a business to the magnitude that you are, and the pressure that comes with, but also with a young family as well. How are you at switching off? Do you switch off? Are you able to? Because like you said, is it that you're able to go, I'm going to go to work and that's where I am working, and when I come home, I can come home and switch off?
Yes, super tough. I don't think anyone's got it completely right. I think, and I'd be a liar if I sat here and said I didn't prioritize work sometimes, and kind of always be rolling around my head in some way or another. I think the hardest thing of the whole thing is having a mobile phone in your pocket, which I always know has got something that I could look at going on at it. And so we're a business that uses Slack for all our internal communications. That's quite often 8,000 messages a week on there that I'll have, and I'll have read every one. And I know, because I've got the stats turned on, because I sometimes want to kind of make myself aware of kind of what I'm kind of engaged in on that front. I think the thing that I have to always work on really is, so like everyone else in the world, I go through periods where I'm really disciplined at my exercise and I kind of get on it, and then being a dad as well, I get ill all the time because they're absolute germ factories. But I've got to stick at the discipline of the exercise, because that's the one thing that gives me the peace, that gets me from kind of those two modes, and kind of keep my sanity in between them, really. Also as well, I read quite a lot as well, and I find that for whatever reason is a really good buffer for me to help me kind of switch between those two worlds. But yeah, it's super tough, and I don't think that there's a one size fits all for it. I think I've realised is that everyone is completely different, and we're all made up completely different. And I think the future of the world will be, I think we will have a much greater idea about the breadth and complexity of human psychology in terms of how we are all wired so differently, whether that's attention, whether that's our ability to be able to kind of context switch, etc. One thing that's always been lucky for me is, one of the greatest skills a creative director needs is that they need to have this ability to context switch all day, because when I've in that past role being like that, quite often be working on 5 or 6 different projects, and you don't have the luxury of time in between. You're doing one thing, presenting something, talking to someone else, and you just got to be able to context switch all day. And so for me, it's been about applying that kind of rigor to my own life, which is try and context switch. And so I have a kind of quite a cast iron rule, which, yeah, again, like all things in life, I fail at, which is when I get to the gate at work, I put whatever's been stressing me out about home on the floor and walk in without it, and then when I walk back out of that gate, I put whatever's been stressing me at work and try and put it behind me, and try and go home. And I have this kind of portal moment where I kind of switch between those two things. Now, like I say, some days it follows me onto the train through the front door. And my wife would say that I was kind of, brooding about whatever, or kind of, elated about it. But I do at least make that attempt, and I think that for me is the important thing. Like anything in life, you just got to try and make the first step, and that's something that will be an ongoing journey for a long time, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Mate, you talked about some challenge. I mean, look, growing a business from 7 to it being 7 years to 100 people across four things. Talk to me about those moments throughout that journey. Talk to me about some of the highlights.
Yeah, it's really weird, because I think you mentioned earlier a business plan, and I'm a believer in planning to a point, because like you already said, like things like pandemics happen and you can't make a plan for that. Do you know what I mean? And I think business plans are great for, if you're trying to seek investment, or you're trying to set a goal for everyone to aim towards and stuff like that. But you can't plan for reality, because reality is chaos. We all know that. Do you know what I mean? Like, stuff always gets in the way. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, I think the kind of the high points for me are where we've managed to wrangle the chaos into meaningful moments. And so there's some classic stuff, like the moment we won Coca-Cola as a client is one of the most ridiculous moments of my career, where basically guy I followed on Twitter, him and I would have interactions and stuff. He was doing some work with Coca-Cola. This is like when we were tiny. There was a couple of us. We didn't really have a ton of work, and Coca-Cola was struggling on this project. This guy said to one of the senior people at Coca-Cola, "You should try these guys. They've just left this other agency. They're pretty talented. I'm sure they'll be able to like throw some ideas in the ring." And so we got given this little bit of money to work on these emojis for Coca-Cola, which was when Coke used to have the names on the cans, which had been super successful for them, but they were looking to replace that. And they said to us, "We'd love for you to have a quick go at this." Now the trouble was, we got that brief just when we were in the process of trying to do a lot of other work, and we didn't have much time, and we definitely couldn't do it, the two of us. And so we roped in a couple of people that we knew to help us, and we just kind of smashed this thing out. And at the time I was thinking, like, this is amazing income, but I wasn't really thinking necessarily about where it would lead. Anyway, it led to some more work with Coca-Cola, and then that kind of built on, and they ended up becoming a landmark client. And it's moments like that where, Twitter is not something that I ever thought would deliver success to my business. I just find it really interesting. I find the dialogue interesting. I find the news. I find the kind of conjecture about the world and where we're going really interesting. But I wasn't thinking this is going to be a driver of me getting business that's going to kind of fundamentally build my business. And so I think the lesson I got out of that one was, like, work can come from anywhere. Like, you should always be just like, don't think about your network as something that you're growing with an outcome. It might just keep on making connections, because they will drive things and take you somewhere else. So that's a big one for me. I think other things involve, like, so the first time we won work in California was pretty amazing for me, because suddenly we could take and export our skills to a market that's been in very recent times been very kind of like open to British design and British design thinking. And so another big one, I think, opening the two first offices, Berlin and LA, which we decided to open on the same day, which anyone listening, I wouldn't advise that. That's one thing that I definitely got wrong along the way. That felt a bit pinch yourself silly, because for me as someone, the way I kind of keep going is I don't like to believe it until it's kind of like well and truly happened. And so for quite a few years I was in denial that Koto would be successful, because I had this horrible feeling that I would just sit back and I wouldn't keep driving it. And so in a way I'd always be, I'd be worried about income. I'd be worried about like all these things, which I probably didn't need to worry about. And so for me, opening other studios, I think was a big part of that, and where that would come from. And then you have moments like I mentioned already about Miami, which is like suddenly you look around, and at that moment in time there was like 70 of us sat having a group photo taken in Miami, and you think, wow, I'm responsible for all those people's mortgages and their kids' education and all that kind of stuff. And they're the moments that you think, so for me in the early days it was about landing those landmark clients, and I think once we started to get that, then other clients come, because obviously they have the confidence. So I'll always be thankful to those early clients where we couldn't show them like we're working with all these people, because we weren't. We could, so they backed us in a way. And then I think beyond that, it's been about then kind of like getting those key hires in place. But yeah, they're the key moments that always stick out to me when I kind of go back across the story. You've got to at some point there let yourself, stand back and go, okay, this is great, I've made this, and then you have to find your next challenge to kick on, because that's as a person, I don't really ever bask around success. I don't find it that's fine. I'm always more focused on what's next to get there.
Yeah, I love that, but and that's interesting. But do you allow yourself to, like you say, you mentioned about that time in Miami? Because again, I talk about enjoying that journey. Have you allowed yourself them moments to actually sit back and go, "Wow, look what I've actually achieved at where I am right now." From when I started 7 years ago, did you imagine you'd be here 7 years down the line with 100 staff?
No, I didn't think it'd be this big, but also that's partly just a self-protection mechanism, because I didn't know how successful it would be. And so I always had this idea that, I'd be happy with 12 people. And that was my kind of like, I guess, my thing that allowed myself to not get ahead of myself. I was like, I need to get to that. And then when I got to that, I was like, well, we might do it. And so I don't ever really sit back on it and go, look at that, isn't that amazing or whatever. I am genuinely all about like, right, got to keep going now, because I'm a great believer in, I think businesses quite often don't realise when they've hit stasis. They think, it's like the sports analogy again. The team's winning, they're doing great, it's good. But what they don't realise is a couple of players have dropped, and the manager's taking his eye off the ball slightly, and the fans can't see it because it's another win, and isn't it great? But it just starts, and then there's all the stuff written afterwards about like, oh, it was that game when they started to turn, or and people talk about, and I've always been inspired by people like Alex Ferguson, who's a real like Marmite character. But for me, I'm like, the stories about him, Gary Neville tells one which is absolutely amazing, I think, which is, they'd won something massive, and Gary Neville had forgotten something at the training ground. He goes in the next day and it's 6 a.m. and Alex Ferguson sat in his office thinking about whatever's next, and I'm not going to claim that I am that level, because that is just like absolute elite at the most amazing level. But for me, I think that's something that I take the energy and drive from, which is, and in a way, I think the situation I'm in now, where I'm not actively working with clients quite so much, and I'm not making the things that we kind of sell to the world. To me, I've become much more focused on those kind of growth things, because I know that growth is about giving space for the people that I've hired to be able to feel like they can continue their career journey with us. It's about us being able to deliver more for our clients. It's about us being able to expand ourselves in the world. And so therefore, that's the way I look at it. And I think also as well, I'm always just worried about pride of becoming before a fall. I think I want to try and, I've got energy still, and so I want to keep going and try and stay at the top. And I think, I know what I'm like, I'll switch off if I start to let myself think like that too much.
And you end up like Manchester United, aren't you?
Yeah, no comment, mate.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But look, before we go into the last couple of bits, I want to just talk to you. You work with some of the biggest brands in the world. So, in your opinion, give me some key elements that make an amazing brand.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, this is something that, the kind of the two extremes of our client base is we work with people like Airbnb and Netflix, which are kind of, household names, and Coke, I've talked about already. And the journey that they're on is different than the journey with a lot of clients we work with, which is they're new companies that have got investment, who are looking to kind of create brands in all different kind of markets. But I think what ties them all together is there's a few key things that I think every brand needs to do. So I think the first thing is about being true to yourself, being authentic. I don't think in the world that we're in, where we make brands and write stories and build out websites and products and stuff for people, is I don't think you can pretend to be someone you're not. I don't really believe in the fake it till you make it thing from a kind of brand point of view, because I think people will smell it out straight away. If you don't have the product to back it up, or you don't have the customer experience, or you don't have the thing that's going to kind of create the joy, then I can't tell that story. And so the first thing we always say to our clients is it has to be true for you to be able to kind of like be able to get out there and sell this. And I'm not interested in trying to, kind of make that fake version, because also, ultimately it's a road to ruin. You look at what happened with Theranos. They had, a very successful brand, but she didn't have the science, and it's gone on to be this kind of, horrendous kind of story about how not to do it in business. And I think at a brand point of view, almost the Theranos brand was almost too good, because it made all these very successful people believe in that company when they really shouldn't, because there was nothing there to believe in. I think the second thing we talk about is distinctiveness. I think, we've never lived in a world where, if I think about it through a consumer mindset, my ability to spend my pound note has never been more diversified. I've got the internet to give me all these different services. I've got experiences that you can do either as a family or an individual. You can consume the world in a way that you never could before, and so therefore brands have got to accept and understand that. And so distinctiveness is whether that comes across in your service experience, whether that comes across in the product you're selling, whether that comes across in the way that you've kind of brought this to market is absolutely is vital. And then the third part that I always think about is compelling, which is you've got to get people into your story. You've got to get them to connect with you, And I think we live in this very media-rich world where, I'm sure most people have got like a million TV platforms they can choose from, and most of it goes completely ignored, especially in our house. We've got, Disney Plus, Netflix, all this amazing stuff on there. But if you're not capturing people's attention, if you're not going, kind of connect with this, and we live in this world where I think word of mouth has never been more important for companies. Me going and telling someone about something, like whether that's a great restaurant, whether that's an experience, a new clothing brand, whatever it is, that is compelling. And so as a brand, you've got to set up people to have these stories which they can go and tell people within their network, because that's how you're going to create an effect and that's how you're going to build an audience. And so they're the three things that I think any brand really needs to engage with, and it's never too early to be thinking about those as well.
Love that, mate. I love that. And just like you said, from a brand point, I've done some stuff with people recently about storytelling and that, and the power of storytelling, and the brand encapsulates the story, doesn't it? And it's listening to all those elements you mentioned, how you find that, and how you get to that. It's fascinating, and mate, brilliant. Hence why you're where you are. Yeah, awesome. Well, look, we're coming up last one. I just want to, before we get into our quick fire questions, just tell me what does the future hold for James Greenfield?
This is an interesting question, because I think it's very easy to live in the future, and we have a lot of conversations out there about people talking about being present, and you mentioned it earlier yourself. But I think for me, I always have to live with one foot in presence and one foot in tomorrow, because the foot in tomorrow drives me not to be overly comfortable in the present. And so I think, from our point of view, I think I've got some unresolved stuff I want to try and get into Asia. I think that's something that we're, really interested in. We're doing some work there already, and I think there's a lot of change happening there, and that's a bit of the world that I would love to look into a little bit more. And then beyond that, I think I want to work to empower the team that I've put in place that kind of are starting to run the 4 businesses, because I'm now sitting at a global level, and I've got a lot of stuff to do there. And so I think the future at the moment is kind of business continues, but how it continues and where it goes is a kind of an exciting next chapter, and I'm really interested to see where that goes. And and whatever happens in the world economy, I think just try and keep going for that, and make sure we stay nimble and we keep going. So that's what the future holds before that. And then I don't like to think beyond that, because then I suddenly start getting worried about retirement and stuff, and I don't feel old enough for that. But you know better than me, mate. It's absolutely smashing us in the face, isn't it?
Worst thing is I'm looking a lot older than you, mate, unfortunately, and I had a tough life. I sound it as well. Anyway, I'm blaming under 24 hours. But just before we do the quick fire ones, one more I want to know: do you think you'll get to a point with the business where you go, I'm content? Are you content now, or where you are right at this second, would you go, I'm content? Because by the sound, listening to you, like you said, just by that last analogy, saying I've always got one foot in tomorrow, because I'm striving for that. Do you feel that you'll ever get to a point where you'll go, that's enough? Whether you sell it, whether you want to exit, whether you just go, actually, I'm at this level now, I'll take a step back because I'm at a global level. You think you're...
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, because obviously it's the kind of stuff that comes to mind. I think there's a lot of factors at play there. I think I personally feel like I'm still early in the journey, so I don't really think about like exit or anything like that, just because it's it's not on the horizon. And also as well, because I know what I'm like. If I exit, I just sit around at home and soon get pretty bored. And I'm definitely one of those people. I'm a great believer in that I need a purpose. I need something to get up and make me attack the week and kind of keep going, on that front there. I think, I'll probably think about running a company like the analogy of a great night out, which is you don't want to be the last person sat there at 5 in the morning, the lights on, and everyone else has gone home. You need to know, particularly when you get older, what the right point to exit stage right is. And so maybe I need to start giving some thought to that and thinking about what that looks like at some point in the future. But right now, it's not really on my mind, to be honest, because I know I can do more, and the challenge as well is that, my whole career I was a creative, and then I became a leader, and then I started to learn about leadership and built out that. But then leadership of 100 people is very different from kind of leading people that you sit next to. And so I'm going through some challenges there, and I think I've got a lot of stuff that I want to keep on going at on that way, and I've been reading a lot of stuff about that recently and trying to put that into practice. And so, that's the thing. It's like 1 foot in tomorrow, not 1 foot in next month, I think.
Love that. Thank you, mate. Listen, as I knew it would be, it's been an absolutely brilliant conversation. So thank you. And I want to finish with me quick fire questions, as I have done on every episode. So before we wrap up, so one piece of advice that you give to your 18-year-old self?
The complete person doesn't exist. I think I used to try and measure myself by other people, and I think what I did was I would look at the version of themselves that they put out in the world. And so you would see people and I'd be like, oh, it's amazing, they're great at the written word, they're great at speaking, they're good looking, they're all these things, and that person's got it all. And I think the older I've got, the more I've realised that isn't a thing. I think everyone's got weaknesses and everyone's got strengths. And I think as an 18-year-old, I was probably a little bit intimidated by that. And I think there's some pieces there that I would have given myself some advice to say, look, this isn't what it looks like, and you will find this out on your journey along the way, and don't worry about that quite so much.
Love that. Who's been the biggest inspiration throughout your life, and why?
It's a really difficult question, this one, because I think I could have given a different answer at any moment in time. And that's been everybody from amazing business leaders through to sports people, through to anybody that has kind of helped me kind of get a bit along. But I think as it stands today, I don't have like a single source of inspiration. I've got like a lot of different streams of where it comes from, whether that's through personal connection or whether that's through me reading about kind of people or understanding them and their kind of motivations and where they go. But I think the thing I've really realised in recent years is that most of my inspiration comes from outside the area where I work at the moment. I don't get a ton of inspiration from within the brand and marketing space. I get a lot of inspiration from, other people that have built amazing businesses, that are 1,000 times bigger and more successful than my one is. And so I think that inspiration thing has really changed the more I've gone on. And so I think that's something I've been investigating a bit recently to understand that and try and kind of get my head around it, really.
Nice. Could you recommend a book or a podcast to our listeners that's had an impact on you?
Yeah, so there's an American author called Ryan Holiday who's written quite a lot of books, quite a lot of which are grounded in Stoicism, which is a really interesting thing for me, which is something that I'm quite fascinated by. And there's a kind of couple of pieces to it, why I am, but one book he wrote is called Ego is the Enemy, and it was a pretty interesting book for me to read. It's one of those books I read at the right moment in time, which was essentially the premise of the book is that don't let your ego rule all of your decision making. And I think it's a really relevant book for a lot of people, which is it's not about taking your ego completely out of the picture, but it's about understanding the role that your ego does play in terms of the decisions that you make. And for me, I think that's been a really fundamental thing at Koto, is not always doing what's right for me, or particularly in the past, my own creative exploits or ability. And so that's, and I don't often go back and read books, but I've read that one twice. And so I think that's a pretty good recommendation for me.
Fair play. And mate, finally, what is your one rule for living a fulfilled life?
It's a pretty cliche, but for me, it's all about balance. I think you've just got to try and maintain balance. Now, do I get that 7 days a week, 365 days a year? No, I don't, not even slightly. But I think it's about trying to find, have calm, but also be active. Try and make sure that you're going after it and attacking it, but that isn't your mode 24/7. Be reflective, be curious, stand back, be on, be off, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, I think that's my rule for living a satisfied life, is try and find that balance and acknowledge the fact that there'll be many days where you fail at it.
What an absolutely brilliant way to finish, mate. Thank you so much. It's been great catching up with you just in general, but and just brilliant answers, a brilliant conversation, and a great episode that I can't wait to share. Actually, we've gone live today, but I'll put this out, and there's so many learnings from there, and it's been such an inspiration to watch the business grow. Like, follow you on social media and see it grow over the last 7 years, and I knew you'd absolutely smash it out of the park as you have done. So I just wish you continued success and growth and a happy life, mate, and good times. And listen, it's you that sent me the link to the High Performance podcast, which started me on my podcast journey, so I've got to thank you for that as well.
Is this the point where I have to apologise to all your listeners?
Who put this guy on with the Essex twang? We have to listen to him so long. Rubbish. Yeah. Absolute legend. Mate, top man, thank you so much. Mate, I'll catch up with you soon. Mate. All the best. That's a wrap.
Goodbye.
This is the County Business Talks podcast, produced by H2 Productions.